This session is devoted to literature and society in Galicia. The first session will have two speakers. Professor Yaroslav Hrytsak, who is professor of the Ukrainian Catholic University, Lviv, Ukraine, where he is director of the Jewish Studies program. He is founding editor of Ukraina Moderna journal and author of numerous publications in modern history of Ukraine, including Essays in Modern Ukrainian History, Kiev, 1996, 2001. Prophet in his native land, Ivan Franko and his community, Kiev, 2006, English translation, 2011. He served as a co-editor of the German-Ukrainian Historical Commission and has various Ukrainian and foreign awards for academic achievements and public activity. He has been elected as a correspondent member of the Polish and Austrian Academies of Sciences. His most recent publication is Global History of Ukraine, published in 2021 and became instantly a bestseller. It's incredible. Over half a year, 5 editions. Wow. Okay. The second speaker this morning will be Professor Eugenia Prokop-Yanets from the Galician University of Krakow. She is professor at the Department of Literary Anthropology and Cultural Studies at the Faculty of Polish Studies at the Galician University, teaches Polish and comparative literature and ethnology. She specializes in the history of modern literature and literary criticism, literary ethnology, as well as in Polish Jewish literature and Polish Jewish culture and literary contacts in the 19th and 20th centuries. She is an author of the books Polish Jewish Literature in the Interwar Years, Syracuse University Press, 2003, Literatura i Nacjonalizm, 2004, Pogranicze polsko-żydowskie topografie i teksty, 2013, Literatura e Ethnologia, 2019, editor of the anthology Międzywojenna Poezja Polsko-Żydowska, 1996, and the collection of articles Polacy, Żydzi, kontakty kulturowe i literackie, 2014. Professor Hrytsak, the chair is yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Bartel. Thank you for a kind introduction. Thank you, organizers conference, for having me here. It's a big pleasure, honor, and treat to be here. Given the current situation in Ukraine, I would rather speak on the other topic, but I will speak on something which I will be never dare to speak if not the war, because I will speak on a very odd case, a queer case, if I may use this term, because we know that Eastern Europe has been, so to say, homeland for anti-Semitism and pogroms, and there are many, and Galicia was not exception. But there is one case that I'm struggling with, and this is exceptionally strange case. There is anti-Christian pogrom made by Jews with the victims. And this has to do something with the very queer case of Galician oil industry. That's something which is missing from our presentation. And basically, there are many terms for which Galicia was known to outside world. Not of them were nice, so to say. We know about Galician misery, which was another nickname for Galicia. We know about Galician elections, which was basically synonym for a fraud at that time. And also Galician oil industry. Not many remember nowadays that Galician oil was the third largest oil repository in the world before the war, after the United States and the Russian deposits in Baku. So this is something which was very important. And also, to a large extent, it defined the fate of this region during the Paris Conference in 1918. Why Galicia was given to Poland? Because Poland was guaranteed that it would allow the foreign capitals, basically French capitals, to exploit this region. So this is basically a very major story, unfortunately forgotten. Lada, who's here, she wrote a very good dissertation on the Jewish entrepreneurs. But again, this case is extremely, so to say, queer. Before the Galicia became the field of the oil industry, it was rather known for the other kind of industry. Also, have to as extraction. It's extraction of mineral wax, so-called ozocrite. And it started. If I have a next slide, just to give you the importance of this region. So there was an unofficial had the story that it was called so-called Raubbetrieb in the German, which is basically predatory industry, in a sense that pays no attention to ecology, to the working conditions, something that could probably respond to early Dickens or Karl Marx or Friedrich Engels, this kind of industry. And basically it was extremely primitive, because basically extraction of oil didn't require any kind of technological innovations. Basically there was such a things, as one of the engineers put it, that there was not even an atom of iron in this kind of technology. The reason was that actually it brought instant success, because once you discover this kind of oil deposit, you could be rich overnight, so to say. So nobody really cared. The other side of the story was that this is a small Carpathian region, village, Boryslav, basically inhabited by Ruthenian, or you may call Ukrainian peasants, which has no experience in money economy. So basically the legislation at that time prescribed that this is the owner of the lands who has the rights to exploit these lands, but basically peasants didn't do it for two reasons. First of all, because they have no experience in the money economy, so they have no money to start. And secondly, there were some traditional values, so to say, because they considered it's a kind of the crime, sacrilege, to exploit the earth, the land, in way not to just bringing potatoes or corn, but to bringing sometimes something else. So the story was that the main benefiters of this ozocrite industry were local Jews from the neighboring city of Drohobych, which was probably one of the largest shtetl at that time in Galicia. And they came in large numbers here, and basically by the short time, you have a kind of a new Jewish city emerging there, Boryslav, when the majority of the population were Jews from the neighboring community, and the city exploded until the beginning of the 19th century. Was from the small village, it became a center from around 50,000 people, and it was a kind of microcosm. Microcosm is everything, because on the one side, you have a Jewish entrepreneurs, some of them became rich and acculturated, and the other side, you have a kind of very poor, well-based, so to say, well-based Jewish workers, and in between, mostly Ruthenian and Polish peasants. They call Ruthenian and Mazurians, who just came and to work then on the seasonal basis. They were working during the break in the agriculture works. So for some kind of technology, we started to emerge by the end of 70s and 80s. They brought some kind of the workers which were fit with technology. It was a Prussian and Moravian. So basically, it's a microcosm. Everyone was there. But since the majority was Jews, it was considered to be very much a Jewish industry. So basically, Boryslav get the name of Jewish industry, and combined with this kind of predatory industry, it gave a very bad notoriety to this region, because basically it's considered this is kind of Jews were equated with predators. And let's make a contrast with another oil industry, which in this neighboring region, it is the neighboring region of Sloboda-Rungurska, which was run by Polish economy. So this kind of contraposition dichotomy. Here is you have semi-Asian Jewish predatory industry, and here you have civilized Polish industry. At least how it was interpreted or accepted in the majority by the majority of the educated public in Galicia, so which makes already in the sense that it's invitation for a kind of anti-Semitic violence and some other side. In contrast to that, there was a Drohobych, and Drohobych served to Boryslav what probably Liverpool was to Manchester. It was a large city, become even larger because of the wax and oil, and it was a booming city. There is a nice quotation from, oh, this is good, you did it. I'm sorry. So basically, what to say is this is kind of another slide which I said that Boryslav has a very bad notoriety. It was considered Galician, California, Austrian, Sicily. A local Polish journalist who spent the years in California during the gold rush, when the pistol and the fist was the only sources of law and order, said that back in California he had not seen a tenth of what he had witnessed in Boryslav. And basically the story is that you have a Drahovich, which is another kind of story, which is flourishing and booming, and it turned into a large industrial and cultural center. There was a network of the civil society there. There were several newspapers published there, clubs, and most importantly, you have a kind of a whole cluster of rather famous people who came from this city in a very short run. And this is, you probably know, Maritza Gottlieb, probably one of the famous Jewish artists at that time, Heinrich Monat and so on. There are many of them. So basically this kind of another contraposition. You have the kind of Boryslav, which is kind of symbol of the Asian Jewish economy, and here's Drahovich, which is also very much microcosm, but in a different way, and becoming cultural center for this time. And one of the most, how would say, famous men who came from this region was Ivan Franko. So he was another, if I may borrow this term from Larry Wolff, an average Austrian, because he was mixed. He had any possible origin that you could just imagine. First, he was born of a mother of a noble origin. One of her uncles was Polish patriot who perished in the Polish uprising in the Russian Empire in 1863. The another uncle was a Galician Greek Catholic priest. His father was ostensibly of a German origin. Basically, there was rumor he is basically Jewish. And he himself spoke German. So basically, this is, microcosm. You have everything there in his biography. So, but Boryslav was a part of his childish year. He was born in the neighboring city, a neighboring village, Boryslav Nahoyevichi. And when his father was a smith, and in the smithy, when the local peasants came to talk with his father, they heard all the stories about the Boryslav. And he just wrote that this is something that he listened to the stories like a fantastic fairy tales. So basically the story was that this was something which was part of his early biography, but he never thought of writing anything on Boryslav. He was very much ambitious man. He wanted to have a career as a literary. But basically he was started a career with, emulating Goethe, or this kind. And basically writing a very boring poetry of this kind. And even more than that, by the beginning of his career, he was very much Russophile. He was thinking about the concept old Rus, sacred Rus. I would say Putin will be very proud to quote him at that time. He was welcoming the Russian glory in the war against the Ottoman Empire, all the kind of things. So basically this was that. But that quite of a sudden, he made a change. In the age of the 20, he decided he is Ukrainian. And this kind of transformation occurred because of some kind of ideological reasons. At that time, when he was a student of the Lviv University was visited by Mikhailo Drahomanov. Mikhailo Drahomanov was the leader of Kyiv Hromada, which was probably the largest Ukrainian civil organization activity. And when this activity has been banned by Russian administration as a result of the so-called MSUKAS, so the Hromada decided to send Drahomanov from Kyiv to Geneva to establish independent journal, which won't be censored. So on the way to Geneva, Drahomanov stopped for a very short period in Lviv. And he met these young students like Franco, and he was just shocked by their obscurantism. So he made a kind of plan, and the plan worked. He suggested him to start reading Russian literature, above all Chernyshevsky, что делать. And this kind of like transformation, quite suddenly overnight they discovered they're Ukrainians. Because basically the plan was, and this is the kind of idea of Drahomanov. Drahomanov was a systematic thinker. Drahomanov believed that socialism and Ukrainian identity, they go very, very close with each other. So basically about the leaders of Ukrainian Hromada, they were saying that they were wearing capital of Marx in one pocket and the Taras Shevchenko Kobzar in another pocket. So basically the idea was that since most of Ukrainians are peasants and most of peasants are Ukrainians, so the conclusion was for Drahomanov, so every educated Ukrainian has to be socialist, and every socialist has to be Ukrainian. So basically on the impact of reading Chernyshevsky and the impact of Drahomanov, this Franco decided that he is both Ukrainian and socialist. And quite of a sudden, when he discovered this kind of socialist and Ukrainian identity, he started thinking about Boryslav. And he started writing this Boryslav story. And it was not just simply literary endeavor, because basically he wanted to construct some kind of the worker movement in this region, because basically we understand that Galicia was typically agrarian province, no proletariat to say, and for socialists like Franco, they needed badly some kind of worker class. At that time, he started to read Capital. More so, he translated a chapter of Capital, which basically talking about this kind of early industry the development. So basically, everything was there. One thing was lacking the worker movement. So basically, he started writing this kind of the Boryslav stories in a way to construct a new reality. He was discovered this kind of what was called social realism later on, because he believed that he writes not just what he just had to write, not as the thing as they really were, but as they're supposed to be, so to say. This was constructing this information. So basically, he at the age of the 20 wrote a novel which is called Boa Constrictor, and the Boa Constrictor is interesting. The main hero of this novel is a Jew, not Ukrainian. And this is a Jew. It's a kind of typical invented story. It's a Jew of Hermann Goldkramer, who was orphaned in a very early age. In order to survive, he tries to handle various jobs. He then finally to move to Boryslav, has a success, becomes very rich, but then as a result of his some activity richness, he became very much alienated from his community, his own family. And the tragic story is that by the end of this novel, his son, Gottlieb, who's demoralized, tried to kill his father. So at the end of the novel, Goldkramer realized the destructive force of capitalism and destroys the painting of Boa Constrictor and his office. I'm sorry, I read this not good reading. But basically, the message was there. This is basically about destructive character of capitalism. And the other novel, which is probably even more instructive, because basically it was the story of strike, of worker strike. Franco insisted several times this is very much a real event. He was bluffing. Because I checked all these archives, there's no even a hint of any kind of organized strike in this area until beginning of the 20th century. But basically, this is kind according to his intentions, that he have to present new reality as not as was as it's supposed to be. So basically, the story is about Drohobicher worker. His name is Benedikt Sinica. He's Ukrainian or Ruthenian. He was injured in the construction site Drohobich, therefore he moved to Boryslav. And he was now just struck by the penury, by the conditions in this region, and he got the idea how to organize a strike. He established a self-help fund together with his brothers, and relying on these funds, they starting strikes, and they win. But basically, they victory ruined by the fact that one of the overseers steal cash box, and this is kind of the disaster. So Benedio falls into depression, but another fellow striker named Andrus Basarab appeals to the workers and set fire to Boryslav. And this is basically the story about the great fire of Boryslav as a part of this exploitation. So basically, this is not kind of the really, how should we say, extraordinary story. I believe that many of you know the work of Charter Win about workers in the Dnipro region. Dnipro-Donbass region, united, because basically he described the same kind of stories. It has nothing to do with the ethnic kind of the description, national description. Basically, story is very simple. It's a very simplified technology, not without technology industry. So industry without industrialization, when the violence is a norm, and there's no worker movement there. And if there any some kind of outburst of the worker activity, it's mostly took anti-Semitic form. So this is basically the story of any extraction industry around the globe, whether it be Boryslav, Donbass, or any kind of things. But the basic story that Franco tries to turn its story in the big socialist narrative. At the same time, he's trying to organize a socialist movement. So actually, he becomes one of the leader of local party, which is there, and importantly, party is made by called officially Polish Ukrainian Jewish Socialist Party in 1881. So it's kind of not idea of national divisions. And Franco writes Franco is one of the author of the programmatic document of this organization. So basically, that's what is the story. At the time he writes this second novel, Boryslav Smiyeться, Boryslav is laughing, he moves from Lviv to his neighboring city, a neighboring village, because of necessity. He is very poor. He works on honoraries. He depends on honoraries. Basically, lives in penury. So he decided to return home to stay with his father. And exactly, he made this move in the idea that he could be closer to Boryslav and he would start to organize this kind of working movement there. But there is one event that happened at the same time when he moves to Boryslav, and he's still working on this Boryslav Smietz, and this is the pogroms in 1881. Pogroms started more or less in the same time. This is the spring of 1881, and this he has a direct bearing reflection on the Galicia, because many Jews from Russian Empire, they moved to the west, and many of them stopped in Galicia. And anti-Semitism is now skyrocketing because of that fact. Many are expecting pogroms that would happen in Galicia as well as they happen in Russian Empire. But for these groups of the socialists, like these friends of Franco, this is Drahomano, Franco, his closest friend Pavlik, and Podolinsky. This was a sign of hope, because they believed that pogroms could be turned into socialist revolution. I mean, it sounds very naive, but at that time they really believed that the revolution is about to come. Reading Karl Marx, reading Chernyshevsky, they have this belief. This Franco was smoking in this late age about this naivety. But since they believed that this pogroms, violence could give a start for a kind of social revolution. So many of them decided to move even closer, like from Geneva to Romania, to be closer to the scene activity. So this is basically what they relate to. At the same time, on Boryslav itself, there start first worker skirmishes. There has emerged large companies, two companies. One is a French company, which is basically has the headquarters in Paris and Vienna, and the other is the local company, made by the several Jewish family. And workers of one of this company, because they didn't get the salary in the due time, so they started to rebel, and it led to the skirmishes. The entrepreneurs called for police fired on the crowd, and this is the first baptism of fire. So basically, the working movement has the first heroic event. So everything went, according to the plan, so to say. Here we have a kind of the pogroms, here we have this kind of working movement, so there's expectation, and this socialist, we think in terms of the kind of social upheaval, so this is like the plans has to be realized. But then everything stopped. And I'm coming to the main point of my presentation. 3 years later, in the summer 1884, something quite unimagined happened. The mob of the Jewish workers, between 3,000 and 6,000, with axes and staves, attacked the dormitory of the French company, which was basically inhabited by that time by these workers from Moravia. And they attacked the dormitory, they ruined the dormitory, and they wounded several workers. 34 of them died on the place. Some others were injured. Police was called, police fired, police arrested, all the kind of things. So basically, 2 attackers were wounded and the rest was scattered. And then they would put to the trial and sentence to certain times of the imprisonment. So this was called Boryslav War. And it became a kind of notoriety. Every newspaper has the story of this Boryslav War. And basically, this was the story, interpretation very much differs. For the first time, the local socialist newspaper, Praca, welcomed it as a kind of the example of the class struggle, but then they changed the conclusion because of as a result of the testimonies, they come to the conclusion this has nothing to do with the class worker. It was not even anti-Semitism, in a sense, because basically it was a competition between the companies. One which was French company, which has a better standards of living and has a dormitory for workers, and the owners of the other, which was Jewish, so to say, Jewish company, could not stand the competition because their workers started to demand the same working condition, the same salary. So therefore, they organized this tank, and the story was that Jews was on the both sides. So both the owners of the French company and the owners of this local company were Jewish. It's like the conflict among the Jews. But basically, it provided a kind of, how to say, disaster for a local socialist movement will have to do with this, because basically they believe this must be some kind of the inter-ethnic solidarity, and there's no ethnic solidarity. So what I'm saying here, how they started to struggle with this Boryslav War, how they tried to depict this Boryslav War, was it to fit or not. So basically, for Franco, it was starting point for his diverging for socialism. He started to work with this Boryslav cycle further, and he rewrote several times this boa constrictor story, and the last version has a quite different picture of this Goldkramer. So nowadays, Goldkramer is not presented in negative sense. He's presented as a very positive hero because he's organizing big industry. He's caring about his workers. He's very good at that sense, and his workers call him our father and protector. And Goldkramer's main enemy, and this is the named Froster Isaac Zenschmerz, the name is very much telling. So he tries to steal Vox from Herman's mine, and it ends tragically because both business rivals are killed in the explosion of the mine, and their deaths marks the ends of the saga. But what's important there, in this kind of the story, Jews, and most not the Jews, but Jews capitalists presented extremely positive sense. So this is start as the departing point for Franco from his socialist views to this kind of his national views. And this is something which is also kind of odd, because you may expect that once you have this kind of transformation to nationalism, you have more anti-Semitism. And early Franco has moments of anti-Semitism. There are some texts he was written there, and he was socialist. But actually I would name it as a progressive anti-Semitism. He was not that much against this anti-Semitism against all the Jews, but also the capitalist Jews. But then, when he moves to nationalism, the more he moves to nationalism, the less anti-Semitic he becomes. This is something which is also provides needs some kind of explanation. So this is basically the story how Franco dealt with this. So basically, for him, this story, this event, Boryslav War, start a starting point when he departs from his original ideas of socialism and became like a typical Ukrainian national democrat. There is another author who wrote on this story, and this is the Stefan Kovalyev. He was a local teacher, a little Boryslav. Has no literary talent, so to say. What he just described. His story is like a little photo snapshots. But basically, he also writes about the story, but nowadays he tells the story in different terms. He turns it very much like, as I said before, that this is the sign of the Galilean culture with the Asiatic character. So basically, this depicts this kind of the anti-Christian pogrom, and he doesn't really blame the Jews all, because he also has a kind of positive character in his novel. And this is Jewish or interested of the new European in type. I will go into detail because the story is very dull. But basically the story is that he's describing quite differently, and so he's very much impact of Franco. He would describe as Franco would did this kind of the story. And there is another author, which is Josef Rogosz, at that time rather popular in Galicia. He wrote several novels. Kind of the adventure character, and he has one novel that's focused exactly on Boryslav War, which is called Pekle Galicijski, in Galician Hell. This is the story of a Ukrainian peasant, Fedko Yatsishin, who lost his land, his father, his family, and his health through the deception of the fraud Yankil Feigl, a local Jew. Then he moves to Boryslav. Then he formed a job at the French company. The Dutch company was attacked. Fedko becomes friendly with some intelligent workers who make a necklace of the working class, and they opened Fedko's eyes to the fact that their common enemy is a Jew, not the capitalist. And the peasant turned worker now has a new goal in life, to avenge wrongs that the Jews done to him. So basically this is a clearly anti-Semitic version of this story. Another puzzling effect or puzzling moment of this kind of the story is that I'm talking about the Polish and Ukrainian narratives of Boryslav. There is no narrative about Boryslav in the Russophile literature. Russophiles literature. Those who belongs to Franco started this basically. And this could be explained because basically the Galician Russophiles, they were very much focused on the traditional values or orthodoxy, so industry doesn't fit their worldview, so to say. There was something which is exception, marginalized, so why should they bother? The most interesting case, which I have no explanation, The Boryslav story has no presentation in the Jewish literature at that time. Even so, there were several Jewish writers, especially in Boryslav and Drohobych, who lived at the same time. I have a name, but all names are not important because they are not totally forgotten. And some of them has been writing in Hebrew and in the Yiddish, somebody teaching Yiddish. One of them was a personal secretary, Theodor Herzl, and translated Yiddish into Hebrew. Another was a very prolific writer who wrote a lot of novels and stories published in Lviv and Drohobych. One of them was a son of the Galicia, of the Boryslav entrepreneur. So basically, there was a lot of chance that any of them would write at least something of this kind of story. And it's just totally absent. I don't have explanation why it would be that. Boryslav in Jewish literature comes very late, basically after the Holocaust. You have here the two books which was recently written recently. One of the Claudia Erdheim. She is a psychiatrist from Vienna, professor of Vienna University, and she also comes from this family of Erdheim, from this origin. So he wrote the family story of the story of their family. So he has the Boryslav war there, and it's very much nice written story which tells what really happened. And there's another one which was published recently, the Jewish Oil Magnates of Galicia, but basically this came very late. So, and the final hint here is, there is another possibility, Bruno Schulz. Because Bruno Schulz stayed in this region, lived in this region, Drohobych, he have another kind of story. And there was Boryslav stories absent in Bruno Schulz literature works, which is probably could also be expected now with the character of his novel literature. But what I found very intriguing, recently they found a picture by Schulz when he depicted Franco. It was done in 1930 during the Soviet occupation. And this is Franco presented as a teacher who teaches one of his student, young Ukrainian poet Kravchenko, who was again this Galician story. She was a German who decided at some point she is Ukrainian. But basically, what I'm saying here is very important. There's a very interesting study of one German literature critic who tries to compare the Boryslav images of Franco with the Drohobych images of Bruno Schulz. And what he just tried to say there, his conclusion is that basically you have just two different types of narratives, archetypes. One, Franco, is very much progressivist, and everything very simple, rectangle, all the kind of things. Image of Schulz, of the Drohobych, is like a labyrinth, so to say. So basically, say there's a structural and post-structural interpretation of the thing. So this is probably may explain why Boryslav is absent in Bruno Schulz's writings. But at that time, when Franco was writing his novel poetry, it has a huge impact on the young people. I have a whole list of the people who said that what important for them was reading of Boryslav, and it's not just for Ukrainian socialists. This is Felix Daszyński, one of the leader of that time Polish socialist movement, the father of Ignacy Daszyński, who was the first prime minister of Polish independent state, and he translated Boryslav Boa Constrictor into Polish, and he wrote in the letter to Franco, after reading your Boa, I was gripped as so by a fever. Show me a person that loves his people more, and I will say that you are the only one. So basically, it has a huge effect at that time. So now I'm moving to my final point. And this is the final point which has answered the question what was posed by Professor Mabuchi yesterday. Whether Galicia exists as a kind of reality. There is a Polish scientist, Tomasz Zarycki, who studies electoral geography in the post-communist 5 countries. And he made this kind of comparison. He sees this kind of schematic scheme list. And basically he says that if you compare all these regions in this large territory, there's only one region that is clearly seen. But this is not region of the post-90s. It's a region of the Habsburg Galicia. He says it's like ask you to remove the borders of that time and to put Galicia back in space. And there's another map that has the electoral map of the second elections in post-communist Ukraine and post-communist Poland. And you see there's a, if I may so, there is a territory. The two main opponents was Leonid Kravchuk and Chernovol. Chernovol is a former dissident, and he won only in Galicia, in Ukrainian part of Galicia. The two other opponents in the Polish territory was Kwasniewski and Valensa, and Valensa won in Galicia. So if you put all this vision together, you got 19th century Galicia. We did several surveys within realm of the Swiss project, starting from 2013 to 2017, every 2 years. And we were asking variety of the questions from people. And each of the questions we have the comparison, each of the questions Galicia came separately. So this is kind of hard to explain, because basically we know the regional in Ukraine is very strong one, but this is a region without regions, because there's no stable region, with the exception of one, and this is the Galicia. So if you just have a kind of feature to characterize Galicia at that time, nowadays, both in Poland and Ukraine, this would be probably three. One of them would be very strong national identity, even close to some nationalist identity, so to say. Another would be violent anti-communism, and the third very much religious traditional worldview, so to say. So what I'm basically said, that if you compare this image of Galicia that was in the 19th century, nowadays Galicia, it's totally different Galicia, so to say. Even so the borders are still there. The borders are working, but this is kind of different picture, because there's nothing with this kind of social story, this kind of the words of the things. And basically I would just make final conclusion would be that this gives idea that, given this kind of famous quotation, that past is a different story, that past is different country, they do all different things. Then nowadays Galicia, as it functions in memory, has very to do with the Galicia that was in the 19th century respected. In what sense? Because it basically reflects the trajectory, the ideological trajectory of Franco. Because it's become less and less social and becomes more and more national. This is how we remember Galicia. Thank you so much.